Hello and welcome back to Mining Stock Daily with me, Paul Harris. Today we're talking about gold development in Latin America, specifically in Ecuador. And I have great pleasure to be joined by Marshall Koval, President and CEO of Lumina Gold. Good morning, Marshall.
Hey, Paul, how you doing? Thanks for having us today.
Very well, thank you. And thank you for joining us. You just announced a $300 million gold stream financing with Wheaton Precious Metals for the Cangrejos project in Ecuador. Tell us a little bit about that, how it came about, and what that means for the project.
Yeah, just prior to announcing the stream with Wheaton, we finished up a PFS, and the PFS was a major move in bringing Cangrejos down the development path. We've been working on the project since 2014. We primarily have financed the company through the PFS with equity raises. And, now we're looking forward to taking the project to the next level, the feasibility study level. So what Wheaton really does is, the Wheaton deal really does, is it puts money in place to move us through the feasibility study. We may need to look at some additional financing, but it'd be relatively minor going forward. But it gets us to the point where we can start to do the feasibility study, negotiate with the government an investment protection agreement, kind of get that all in place to put into the feasibility study. And then it gives us $250 million worth of financing for the projects once it's constructed, whether we're the ones that are constructing it or if we're taken out along the way. So basically, it's a vote of confidence. There's been rigorous DD on it. It validates the Cangrejos project as a major project. If you'll recall, we had about 371,000 ounces of gold production a year over a 26-year mine life, and at $1,650 gold, we had an NPV at a 5% discount rate at $2.2 billion NPV US. So, the project's robust. It's a long-term project that has a mine life of 26 years. So I think just the Wheaton deal validates the validity of the project and where we're headed moving forward with their support.
Well, thank you, Marshall. It's in some ways it really says, this project's the real deal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a couple other sort of data points there. That $300 million, that includes an initial $48 million of initial financing, which presumably gets you through the feasibility and towards that construction decision. You mentioned the PFS that you published in April, 371,000 ounces a year of gold, but also 41 million pounds of copper as well. And so given the environment we're in, where you obviously potentially, I imagine, talking to some of the big gold companies about whether they're interested. The big gold companies are also increasingly interested in copper. We've seen that with the Newmont-Newcrest mining deal. That's copper's a key part of that. Barrick Gold has been making it very clear that it wants more copper, for example. So having this copper component presumably makes Cangrejos quite interesting for a lot of the gold companies, in addition perhaps to copper companies and others who may like both metals.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The revenue mix in the PFS is about 80% gold and 20% copper byproduct. And the byproduct credit gives us a pretty low cash cost, AISC of about 671 an ounce. So it's attractive in that perspective. And I think the other thing that we did, versus the PEA that we did in 2020, we've rephased the project to make the initial capital cost a bit lower and more manageable for broader, suite of companies to take it on if that's where we head. So we went from 40,000 ton per day to 80,000 ton per day in years 1 through 5. We expanded to that 80. And in this study, we've gone 30 to 60, and that's in year 3, and 60 to 80 in year 7. And what that did is we were in a high inflationary environment when we did this study. So we've captured inflation. We've been able to phase the project in a way that the NPV and the initial capital is fairly flat. So no major impact from inflation, although inflation is accounted for in the initial capital at the 30,000 ton per day initial project.
Thank you. Now, one other sort of detail of the financing that's caught my eye, there's a partial buyback facility or ability on the stream. You know, should
Yeah.
somebody come in and sort of buy you out or partner with you, you have the future operator will have the ability to buy back part of the stream. Give us some more detail there, please.
Yeah, that's basically a 1/3 buyback, and I think the trigger on that is by 2030, that's available, or a change of control. And so that's significant potential. If there's an acquirer that is looking at streams and want to buy back and lower that stream, it goes down to 4.4% of the production.
Okay, so you've got this financing in place, this stream financing in place. What are the next steps for Cangrejos?
So Cangrejos right now, we're just getting the 43-101 done, and we'll have that filed sort of around the 1st of June, thereabouts. And we're looking at the consultant recommendations for the feasibility study. We're starting all of our planning for that. The first phase of that will be go back into the field. In years 1 through 3 of production, we'll want to drill that to measured so we can report a proven reserve in the feasibility study. Then there's geotech work and infrastructure field work. So we anticipate that that's sort of an 8-month to roughly a year sort of time frame to complete all that field work, metallurgy included. And then we'll do the engineering for the feasibility study beyond that. So that's what all the planning's going on now, and that's what we're up to as sort of next steps.
Okay, and for the sort of eventual feasibility study, what's the sort of approximate ballpark timing on that?
So I would say it's sort of 18 months to 24 months is what we're looking at from start to finish on it.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about the political situation in Ecuador. Having 18 months to get to feasibility study is probably a good thing in light of what's happened over the past there. So with the President Lasso basically effectively calling for new elections later this year. What's your view on what's happening? What are its potential impacts on the mining sector, do you think?
Yeah, I think, listen, I think it's 6 months out before we know, with the new elections that he's called for, with dissolving Congress, who's in power after that. I think one of the things, if I go back to the Cangrejos project, we're in the process and we've been in conversations with the government about amending our exploration investment protection agreement to an exploitation investment protection agreement, and setting the terms for royalties, taxes, duties, that sort of thing that'll be used in the feasibility study. So we anticipate continuing that, and hopefully that'll get taken care of, where we'll get a term sheet within the period while the current minister's in place. Beyond that, I think if you look at who's been in power and who are the groups, political groups that are strongest right at the moment, you know, you've got the Correistas party. They won the elections in Guayaquil and Quito. They were the same party that basically brought mining back into the fray in sort of 2013. And so what we've seen through successive governments, Correa's government, Moreno's government, and then also Lasso's, is a continuing improvement in the fiscal and regulatory regime. And obviously there's still regulatory regulations that need to come into place under ILO 169, which Ecuador adopted for consultation and consent with indigenous communities. So there's, you know, all that's going to have to take place. And so I think, you know, my view is, regardless of who comes into power, I think we're going to see mining continue to be important. That doesn't mean there's going to be ups and downs and hiccups and delays in the way. But I think one other interesting stat is mining just passed in March bananas for number 3rd place in exports in the country. So it's becoming more and more critical. And, you know, a lot of that is the results of Mirador and Fruta del Norte with their exports. And then also there's been significant exploration spending in the country. You know, our project we spent quite a bit of money, probably on the order of $70 million to date. So that's still going on. So my hope is that things will settle down. We'll get some political certainty. And in the interim, until we know who the next president is, we're going to see things move as best they can.
Well, thank you for that update there, Marshall. Now, obviously, with a 26-year mine life, and 371,000 ounces a year of production. That's a very, very significant project that could really transform the region and help with the economic growth of the region where you're located. 371,000 ounces. Can you put that on a world scale? There's not that many projects that big, is there?
Yeah, so if you look at it, we're the 26th largest resource project in the world by any scale: production, development, exploration. So it's significant in that regard. I think if you look at also projects that are available in the market to go over 250,000 ounces a year, I think there's less than 20 projects that have that type of scale. So any way you look at it, it's a significant large-scale project. And I think the scale of it and productivity from a mining perspective, it's more akin to a porphyry copper deposit than your traditional gold deposit. So productivity and all those things should help lower the cost of the project. And I think there's exploration beyond just the 26-year mine life that we have. We have quite a few other targets, blue sky, and then there's areas to extend Cangrejos and Gran Bestia at depth, and then along strike in a couple of areas. So, you know, there's a lot of potential for this even to be a longer life asset.
Okay. One final question, if I may, and more about sort of the company's strategy. With this financing in place, does that take off some of the pressure to potentially find a buyer or a partner, or will those sort of processes potentially sort of continue, but now you've got added attraction given you've got this stream financing in place?
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, no matter who, particularly with, you know, the country risk profile of Ecuador, you're going to have to finance the project in some form, right? So I think some companies wouldn't like a stream, others would be attracted to them, but I think it helps put the cornerstone of, you know, sort of a quarter of the financing needed at the PFS initial capital level. And I think that's positive in the long run. So I think overall, we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I think it's a good thing for the project. It's a good thing for Wheaton. It's a good thing for Lumina and the country of Ecuador.
Okay, thank you. Now, Lumina Gold is going to be presenting at the CGS Ecuador event that we're hosting in Quito in about a month's time. Thank you very much for that. And we'll be talking in more depth at a lot of the issues that we've talked about today, specifically the gold projects and development, economic development, regional economic development, and of course, the changing political and regulatory environment. Lumina Gold trades on the TSXV under LUM, and on the OTCQX under LMGDF. Marshall Koval, President and CEO, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
And that's all from me, Paul Harris. Stay tuned for more from Mining Stock Daily.